My brother's attorney called to tell me I'd lost. I said, I know, that's what I wanted. There was a long pause on the line. Then, excuse me? I told him to have a good evening and hung up. My brother didn't call. My parents didn't call. Nobody called to check if I was okay or if I needed anything or if, after everything, I was still standing. That silence told me everything I needed to know about the decision I just made. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without context. And the context is almost 11 years long. My grandfather built a house in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in 1974. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage, a half-acre of land that backed up to a tree line. Nothing fancy. But he built it with his own hands over 2 summers, doing the framing himself, hiring out only the electrical and the roof. He was proud of that house the way men of his generation were proud of things. Quietly, without ever really saying it out loud. He just kept it up. Painted it every 8 years whether it needed it or not. Fixed the gutters before the first frost. Replaced the water heater the year it turned 15, not the year it failed. He died when I was 19. He left the house to my mother and her brother, my uncle, in equal shares. My uncle sold his half to my mother within 6 months. I'm not sure exactly what that cost her, but I know she drained most of a savings account to do it. She wanted the house. She wanted it the way my grandfather had wanted it, as something to hold on to. For the first few years, it was fine. She and my dad used it as a weekend place, a summer place, somewhere to go when the city got to be too much. My brother and I grew up visiting it on holidays. We learned to ride bikes on the gravel driveway. We caught fireflies in the backyard. It was one of those places that becomes a feeling more than a place, the word home in its most essential form. Then my mother got sick. She was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's when she was 53. My father, to his credit, never flinched. He just quietly reorganized their entire life around her needs. Sold the condo in the city, moved them both into the Bucks County house full-time, converted the first-floor office into a bedroom so she'd never need the stairs. He took care of everything. For 6 years, he took care of everything. When he died, a heart attack, without warning, on a Tuesday morning in March, my mother was 59, my brother was 32, and I was 28. My brother lived in Seattle by then. Had a good job, a girlfriend who'd become his wife within the year, a whole life built at comfortable distance from anything hard. I was living 40 minutes from my mother, working as a paralegal, recently out of a relationship, with enough room in my life to absorb what was about to fall on me. So it fell on me. I want to be honest here, because I think people sometimes tell these stories and make themselves the perfect selfless saint and make everyone else the villain. That's not what this is. My brother wasn't a monster. He sent money when I asked, not always as much as I needed. Not always as quickly, but he sent it. He flew in for the big medical appointments. He called my mother on Sundays. He did what he could from 3,000 miles away. And I believed, for a long time, that it was genuinely the most he was able to give. What I didn't account for was how much I was giving. The first year, I was still paying my own rent and driving to my mother's house 4 or 5 times a week. Then her needs increased, and I started staying over 3 nights, then 4. Then my lease came up, and I did the math, what I was spending on my apartment, combined with gas, combined with the hours I was losing from work, and I made a decision. I gave up my apartment and moved in. At first, we kept it informal. I paid the utilities. My brother covered the property taxes. We split the homeowner's insurance. That lasted about 8 months before the first time he told me he was a little tight and asked if I could cover the taxes that quarter, and he'd pay me back. I covered them. He didn't pay me back. Not that quarter, not the next. I stopped asking. By year 3, I was paying everything. Property taxes, roughly $6,400 a year in our township. Homeowner's insurance, about $1,800 annually. The water heater failed in year 2, $11,100 to replace. The roof needed patching in year 4, $3,800. I had the driveway resurfaced in year 5 because the cracking was becoming a liability with my mother's walker. Another $2,200. I kept a spreadsheet, not because I was planning to use it, but because I am a paralegal and I was raised by a man who kept receipts. My mother's name was on the deed. When she passed, in year 6, peaceful, at home, the way she'd wanted. The house was split equally between my brother and me in her will. I thought that was the end of the story. I thought we would sell it, split whatever equity was there, and go our separate ways with the grief. I had already started looking at apartments. My brother had a different idea. He called me 2 weeks after the funeral. He said he'd been thinking. He said the house meant a lot to him, to both of us, and that he didn't want to sell it. He said he wanted to keep it in the family. He said his wife had been talking about her parents needing a place closer to them, and that maybe, just maybe, this could work out for everyone. I remember sitting in the kitchen of that house, looking at the tree line my grandfather had looked at for 30 years, and feeling something go very still inside me. I asked him what exactly he was proposing. He said he thought we should transfer ownership to him. He'd handle everything going forward. He'd maintain it, pay the taxes, keep it up. He just thought it made more sense for it to be under one name. I asked him about the money I'd put in. He said, and I want to be accurate here because I've thought about this sentence many times since. I mean, you were living there, so that's just kind of like rent, right? I didn't respond. I said I needed to think about it. He said he understood and that there was no rush. There was, in fact, a rush. Within 3 months, he had hired a real estate attorney and filed a partition action in the county court. His argument was that since he had not agreed to sell and I had not agreed to transfer, the only resolution was to force a sale or a buyout, and that if it went to a forced sale, the proceeds would reflect current market value minus any outstanding costs, which his attorney was arguing should include back payment on the informal living arrangement I'd had at the property. He was trying to bill me for the years I'd spent caring for our mother. I found out about the filing from the court notice, not from him. My own attorney, a woman I'd worked alongside for 3 years and trusted completely, told me to fight. She laid out our options. We could counter-argue the partition. We could file for an equitable distribution claim based on my contributions. We could push for a formal accounting. She thought we had a strong case. She thought, if we pushed, I could walk away with significantly more than half. I listened to all of it. I took notes, I asked questions, and then I told her I needed a few days. Here is what I did in those few days. I pulled the deed. I had read it before, but I read it again more carefully. The way you read something when you're looking for something specific. My grandfather had been particular. The deed contained several maintenance covenanters attached to the property, requirements that had transferred through each ownership change. Minimum upkeep standards, a drainage easement along the back third of the lot that required the owner to maintain clear access, with liability for any blockage-related damage to the neighboring property. A shared well agreement with the property to the east that was still technically active, meaning the owner was responsible for a proportional share of well maintenance and testing costs that hadn't been invoiced in years, but that were, on paper, still accruing. I also pulled the township records. The driveway I had resurfaced cut about 4 feet into a portion of land that had an access easement. The resurfacing didn't violate the easement, but maintaining it, specifically the drainage channel that ran beneath it, was an owner obligation. An owner who didn't maintain it could face municipal fines. And then there was the issue of the back tree line. 3 trees on the property line had been flagged by the township as potential hazard trees, large, aging oaks that overhung both our property and the neighbors. My grandfather had known about this. He'd had them assessed years ago, and the assessment report was in his files, which I had because I had been the one to go through his files. The current owner of record would be responsible for any damage those trees caused if they fell. None of these things were deal breakers individually. None of them were impossible to manage. But together, the easement maintenance, the well agreement, the drainage liability, the tree assessment, they painted a picture of a property that came with a serious list of obligations that had been quietly handled for decades and that my brother, sitting in Seattle, had no idea existed. I called my attorney back. I told her I had changed my mind. I told her I wanted to concede. She thought I had lost my mind. She asked me to come in. I went in. She walked me through, again, what I was giving up. I listened. I told her I understood and that I wanted to proceed with the concession, but that I needed the settlement agreement to be very specific about what was being transferred. She asked what I meant. I told her I wanted the agreement to explicitly acknowledge the transfer of full ownership and full responsibility for the property as it stood. including all recorded covenanters, easements, maintenance obligations, and encumbrances, as they appeared in the deed and in county records. I wanted the language to be unambiguous. He was accepting the property in its entirety, with complete awareness that all attached obligations transferred with it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she started to smile. "You want them to win," she said. "I want the record to be clear," I said. We drafted the agreement. My attorney made sure it cited the specific deed page numbers, the easement references, the well agreement clause. On our side, we stipulated that my brother was accepting full ownership with full knowledge of all recorded obligations. The language wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a trap, not technically. It was just thorough. Legally thorough. I signed my half of the deed transfer on a Wednesday afternoon in November. My brother's attorney filed it the same week. My brother posted a photo of the house on social media 3 days later with the caption, "Officially home." I didn't comment. I didn't reach out. I moved into a rental in New Hope, about 20 minutes away, and started rebuilding what the last 6 years had taken from me. The call came 11 days later. It wasn't my brother who called. It was his attorney, the same one who had filed the partition action, the same one who had argued I owed rent for caring for my dying mother. He called my attorney first, and she called me. He had apparently spent some time, post-transfer, actually reviewing the full deed in the county records. The drainage easement maintenance had a backlog. The channel hadn't been formally cleared and documented in over 4 years, which put the current owner in a potential liability position with the neighbor to the east, who had already sent one informal complaint letter that my brother's attorney had somehow not caught. The shared well agreement had triggered an invoice from the well maintenance cooperative, a small amount, around $340. But the bigger issue was that my brother's attorney had not disclosed this obligation to his client before advising him to proceed with the partition. The hazard tree assessment, the one from my grandfather's files, the one I had quietly included in the property disclosure packet, had flagged all 3 oaks as requiring either cabling or removal, with an estimated cost of $8,500 to $12,000, depending on what the current assessment found. My brother's attorney was calling to ask if there was any room to revisit the transfer. My attorney called me to relay this and asked how I wanted to respond. I thought about it for about 30 seconds. "Tell him the transfer is complete and the record is clear," I said. "He accepted the property in full. We have nothing further to discuss." She passed that along. My brother called me that night. The first time he'd called me, personally, not through attorneys, in almost 5 months. He was upset. He said he felt like I had set him up. He said he thought I was his sister and that I'd manipulated him. I let him talk. I let him get through everything he wanted to say. And then I said, very quietly, "I spent 6 years in that house. I paid the taxes. I paid for the roof. I resurfaced the driveway. I sat with Mom every single night for the last 3 months of her life. I didn't set you up. I just stopped protecting you from things you should have known." He didn't say anything. "I also need you to know," I said, "that I have a spreadsheet. 6 years of expenses. If you'd like to talk about reimbursement before you start spending money on tree removal, I'm open to that conversation." He said he needed to think. I told him I understood. I told him there was no rush. The irony of that sentence was not lost on me. It has been 14 months since that call. My brother did not sell the house. I don't know whether that was pride or attachment or some combination of both. He hired a local property management company to handle the maintenance obligations. That alone costs him around $3,600 a year. The hazard trees were assessed in the spring, and the removal came in at just under $11,000. He handled the drainage easement documentation, which cost less but required a surveyor. The well maintenance invoice turned out to be the beginning of a 3-year assessment cycle. He's now on the cooperative's regular billing rotation. He has not reached out to discuss the spreadsheet. His wife's parents did not move into the house. I don't know why. I didn't ask. What I know is this. I wake up every morning in my rental apartment. 2 bedrooms, good light, no obligations attached to the deed. And I feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I feel like myself. I feel like someone who made a choice, even when everyone around her was telling her to fight differently. My attorney asked me, a few months after everything settled, if I regretted not pursuing the equitable distribution claim. She said I could have walked away with real money. I told her I had walked away with something better than money. She raised an eyebrow. I said, clarity. I walked away with clarity about who my brother is, about what I'm willing to carry, about the kind of life I want to build now that I'm not building it around someone else's comfort. The house in Bucks County is still standing. My grandfather built it to last, and it will probably outlast all of us. The tree line is still there. Those 3 old oaks my grandfather used to look at, that my mother used to look at, that I looked at for 6 years while I tried to hold everything together. They're my brother's problem now, in every sense of the word. And I find when I think about it that I don't feel angry. I used to for a long time. I was angry at the partition filing, angry at the just like rent comment, angry at every Sunday phone call that ended with him asking me to handle something he was too far away to handle himself. The anger was real, and I don't want to pretend it wasn't. But at some point, I think it was sometime around when I was drafting the settlement language with my attorney, the anger turned into something quieter. Not forgiveness, not exactly. More like release. I stopped needing him to understand what those 6 years cost me. I stopped waiting for an acknowledgement that was never going to come. The deed is in his name. The obligations are his. The tree removal bill was $11,000, and it went to his address, not mine. That, more than anything, felt like closure. Not the kind that comes with an apology. Not the kind that comes with a check, though I still have that spreadsheet and I am still, technically, open to that conversation. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying things that were never yours to carry alone, and you set them down so gently that no one even notices until they're the one holding them. That's the kind that lasts. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the phone call from my brother's attorney, not the night my brother accused me of setting him up. The moment I keep returning to is much quieter than any of that. It's the afternoon I sat alone at my grandfather's kitchen table with a deed in my hands and made a decision about who I wanted to be. I could have fought. My attorney laid out a real case. 6 years of expenses, documented to the dollar. A spreadsheet that told the whole story without a single word of explanation. I had the receipts. I had the legal standing. And I had every right to use them. But I'd watched what fighting does to people. I'd watched it hollow them out. Watched them spend years and money and sleep pursuing a version of justice that, even when it arrived, left them somehow emptier than before. I didn't want that. I wanted to be free. And the only way I could see to get there was to stop trying to make my brother understand something he had already decided not to understand, and instead let the truth land on its own terms, on its own timeline. That's not passivity. I want to be clear about that. What I did required more discipline than a fight would have. It required me to hold on to what I knew about the property, about the obligations, about the full picture, and stay quiet about it while everyone around me assumed I was folding. It required me to trust that reality doesn't need your help to arrive. It just needs you to get out of its way. I think about my grandfather sometimes when I think about this. He was not a man who talked much about fairness or justice or what people deserved. He just maintained things. He kept records. He showed up to the hard work without making a production of it. That's how he built something that lasted 50 years, not through argument, through integrity, through doing the right thing even when nobody was watching, even when there was no immediate reward for doing it. I spent 6 years living that way in his house. I paid what needed paying. I fixed what needed fixing. I sat with my mother through the nights that nobody else was there for. Not because anyone was keeping score, because it was the right thing and I was the one who was there. And some part of me had to believe, that doing right by people eventually meant something, even when those people didn't see it. It did mean something, just not in the way I expected. What my brother got when he took that house was not a victory. He got the full weight of a responsibility he'd spent years watching me carry without ever once asking how heavy it was. The tree removal bill, the easement documentation, the well maintenance cooperative, none of that came as a punishment from anywhere outside himself. It came from the simple, unavoidable fact that ownership is not just a privilege, it is a set of obligations. And he had spent years believing he could want the privilege without accepting the obligations. That's the thing about cause and effect. It doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care about what you thought you were getting. It just keeps its own account, quietly, and eventually it balances. I have my rental apartment with good light. I have my spreadsheet still open, still accurate. I have the particular peace that comes from knowing I acted with my whole self. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity about what was right and what I was willing to keep carrying. Some things you set down. And some things, when you set them down gently enough, become exactly the lessons someone else needed to learn. I didn't teach my brother anything. The deed did that.